Yeah.
Okay, so I
go.
knew that was going to happen. So sorry, everybody. So we are recording now, and so this will go out to folks usually about a week or so after this happens. So anyone attending live today will get a certificate. If you're attending as a group, send me an email with anybody that was watching with you that needs a certificate. That way I can make sure to get that to you. But we'll have resources and presentation copies and all of that as well included. Let's see here. Jeff, just noticed your question real quick, so I'll just answer that. That yes, there is a list of certified professional individuals on the Summit Soil and Water website. There's a link at the bottom of that page that has a list of all currently certified people. So you can find that there. Okay, so with that, I'm going to jump into my part of the presentation. So, balancing function with expectations in stormwater ponds, kind of broad overview of what we're trying to achieve. So hopefully this will kind of tie in some of that for everybody. So again, my name is Brooke Fresher. I'm one of the urban conservationists here at the district. I've been here about 9 years now, and so I deal a lot with stormwater ponds or just pond questions and fielding in general. So what I'm hoping to go over right now, we'll go over types of ponds, the challenges that we have with them, common concerns that we hear from landowners, property owners, some of the ways we look to address those or reduce impacts, and other considerations and resources. So we get a ton of questions about ponds. Some of it's your recreational ponds. Usually, though, they end up being stormwater ponds when we really look at them. Not that we don't have recreational ponds around the county, but there's just fewer and fewer of them, it seems like, every year. So, but it's always important to kind of outline the key differences between these ponds. We're going to look at primary use, the design and construction, contributing drainage area, and the inputs that come with them. So we'll start with our farm pond, which is, I call it a farm pond. It's really anything that's recreational fishing and swimming uses. It can also be ag use, used for irrigation or livestock. Again, mostly around here, we're looking at that recreational use for most of the ponds around here anymore. When it comes to those types of ponds, some of the design construction elements that are required or recommended, you're looking for a depth of at least 8 feet or more, maintained over 25% of the pond. Slopes about 3 to 1 on average, with minimal fluctuation of water levels throughout the pond, which helps minimize maintenance issues. That contributing drainage area for these types of ponds tends to be, again, the guidance is if you have a 1 acre pond, you want about 10 to 15 acres of drainage to sustain that pond. And usually that drainage is consisted of vegetated, forested areas, so undisturbed, undeveloped land use is usually what's should be coming to these types of ponds. So because of that, those inputs generally are surface flow, they're filtered through vegetation, or there could be groundwater contributions as well. And so that information has been around for quite some time. When you're looking at recreational use ponds, if you're interested in learning more about how to manage those types of ponds, construct those types of ponds, the Ohio Department of Natural Resources has been doing this for decades. This is a great handout for everybody to get familiar with if you aren't already. And so this is where a lot of this information is coming from, specifically in the watershed information that's talking about that size per, how big you want your drainage area to be. And specifically, states too much inflow, if you have too much drainage area coming, can lead to sedimentation and water quality problems. Similarly, land use practices affect the water quality. So specifically calling out high ag use land should be avoided if possible. That's, probably a twofold reason for that. I mean, if you think about an active ag field being farmed, you've got exposed soils until crops are grown. You got that, discharge that could be coming off the sediment, nutrients. And then after the fact, a lot of the areas that are being developed in our county now were prior farmland. So, the concern of maybe legacy nutrients in those soils, adding to, nutrient loads within basins that are constructed in those, just something to think about. So specifically stating, forested or non-ag grasslands provide best protection for sedimentation and water quality problems. Pond size and depths, again, this is, for that recreational, specifically stating, 1 acre or larger ponds are really what you're shooting for when you're looking at fishing, good sport fishing. Smaller ponds being just harder to manage. Minimum depth, again, that 8 foot over at least a quarter of the basin. Slopes, 3 to 1 across most of the shoreline areas. And again, anything that's, water less than 3 feet deep, it's specifically, letting is more prone to being choked with aquatic vegetation and algae. So those are the farm pond kind of notes. Now, oops, go back. One too many. So stormwater ponds, obviously primary use, they're constructed to take care of flood flow and capture pollutants. So quite a different primary use. Depths of these kinds of ponds are highly variable. They do tend to be shallow though. Now, obviously that could change if a site needs a lot of fill for building, then you might end up with a deep pond if they just need to use that soil for that kind of use. The Rainwater and Land Development Manual, section 2.6, I noticed recently updated this month. And so we'll look at some of that. I won't dive into a lot of the design and construction. Obviously, we could spend a whole day, a whole nother roundtable on design construction. So, and this information is readily available in a lot of locations. So I'm just trying to hit a couple high points here. And so that section calls for, about 3 to 6 feet on average depth for stormwater ponds, and specifically has a 3 foot for forebays depth. I was trying to think if I've seen a recent forebay that is 3 feet deep, and I was having a hard time. And 3 to 1 slopes or flatter, obviously for safety issues. You've got these basins, around residents or places where people are going to be close proximity to them. Now this slope is very different during construction. When a base is being used for sediment, it can be the slope can be very steep during construction. So afterwards, you want safety shelves. Now these ponds also, just given that their design is to manage volume control, fluctuation is pretty frequent in water levels, which can lead to more maintenance issues. So the contributing drainage area of stormwater ponds, obviously, there's not really a great direct correlation between the size of the drainage area and the size of the pond, because there's a lot of things you're calculating for in a stormwater pond are based on volumes that you need to capture, sediment, whether it's sediment or dewatering or water quality. So it just varies based on those equations in your site specific information. But again, that contributing drainage area, instead of being undeveloped land, it's largely developed land that's draining in. So with that comes, it's piped flows from hard surfaces and everything that comes with that off of the surface. So again, where we're getting a lot of that information for that side of the table is this is from the construction general permit. Just again, talking about the different kinds of zones we get. This is during construction. You get your sediment zone and dewatering zone, and again, different kinds of drainage, different kinds of volumes you need to accommodate during that time. And during construction, optimum depth is really 3 feet, specifically stating anything over 5 feet should be avoided for that during that use. This is part of the new chapter in the Rainwater and Land Development Manual. And so this does say for a permanent pool, we're talking more permanent pools, I guess, wet basins, that that permanent pool is a very important part of the function. And so they do specifically state drainage area of at least 6 acres recommended for supporting basins in urbanized areas. And I just wanted to note a couple of these other little notes in here. This is a really good section. I think Justin's on the line maybe today, or I think he was going to be. I know Justin works a lot on doing updates to the Rainwater and Land Development Manual. So say thank you to him in advance. But anyway, so something to remember, you don't want to design ponds to where they're receiving a natural stream into it. We have a handful of those around the county that are old ones where that's happened, and they have a lot more sediment issues. You get a lot more frequent calls from residents about what they can do, and there's just a lot more challenges with those types of basins. So avoid that whenever you can, for sure. And also, keeping in mind that permanent pools can act as heat sinks, and so discharging warmer water to receiving streams can affect those habitats, especially if they're cold water fisheries. So just being mindful of that sensitive situation there. This is just a diagram reminding us all of how these basins kind of tend to be looking nowadays. You got your forebay where everything comes in initially, hopefully settles out, continues through the permanent pool. You've got your storage zones that are controlled by your outlet structure. And so hopefully, and you're trying to get forebays to capture as much sediment as possible so that you're not impacting as much as the rest of your basin, so it's a little easier to maintain. Again, the sizing of forebays, there's some general size guidelines you want to follow, but average depth again stayed at, you want it to be at least 3 feet, and having some kind of vegetation, a good berm to help make sure that that happens is really important. These can take a beating, so these need to be regularly inspected and maintained. Basin depth again, saying that 3 to 6 feet. This says, permanent pool shouldn't be deeper than 10 feet due to thermal stratification, resulting in anaerobic conditions. And I will just make a side note here. I recently rewatched this presentation. If you're not familiar with the University of Minnesota, they put together they have a really great, robust stormwater research and webinar series that they do. But I just rewatched this, and it was specifically about phosphorus releases from sediments and anaerobic conditions. And they really found a lot of pond stratification occurring in shallow ponds. And so I will just say that depth doesn't necessarily mean you will not get stratification, and to where you might end up having phosphorus actually release from your sediments. And so I would recommend, I'll put this in the resources as well, but just wanted to make a side note about that. And we can touch on that a little bit later too. Basin slopes, again, just keeping them kind of shallow as gradual as you can. And if you definitely want plants, you want to make sure you have a nice shelf for them as well. So seeing the differences between the types of ponds, we can kind of pretty much start to know what kind of challenges they're going to pose. Really kind of see challenges even with the initial planning, thinking about the type of nuisances that you might hear from folks that live nearby. This is just an example plat, this is an early phase. There's going to be more phases to come. So obviously these people will still be living here probably while this basin is still functioning as a sediment basin. That understanding that how that's going to function until all the rest of these houses get built. Is it going to be a shallow basin to where maintenance might create nuisance issues before maintenance is going to occur? Just knowing also access points to maintain, can you easily get in here to do the maintenance that you need to do? So just being mindful that early initial phase of siting and selecting is pretty important to consider. Obviously, the transition from construction to post-construction is a challenge. This is a good picture of just what I was talking about a minute ago. This basin is still functioning as a sediment basin. Most of the lots are built. There's still quite a bit. There's still quite a bit being built at this point, I think. But you can clearly see the sediment loading, and they've got this lovely fountain going. The outlet is over here to the right, upper right. So obviously this fountain is helping keep sediment suspended. This is not what we want to see during sediment basin use. So that, again, that understanding, controls get left in place. Some of you will know what basin this is, but this is, about a 20-year-old basin, and this riser is still in place. So the pond has adjusted accordingly over the decades. And so we're working on trying to gradually get this to its final configuration without affecting downstream neighbors or without losing the bank to erosion for a sudden drop in elevation change. So, and obviously that perception of what it's going to look like to the neighbors, afterwards. So, and again, those fluctuating water levels are a challenge. You can see kind of here, just the indicator of how much water, changes in this basin. And that's common, that's what that's what that storage zone is meant to do. But it can lead to challenges with, debris clogging things, or just causing erosion, or having a hard time for vegetation to get established from the construction period into that post-con component. Pollutant loading. So this is the big one. I'm going to let this run while I talk, hopefully. think there's any sound to it. So this is a little video that Kurt Kellyo shot a while back when we did the Crawford Farms retrofit project that a lot of you may be familiar with already, but it's just a good visual reminder of that first flush that occurs during a rain event. You know, all of the different things that are coming into this forebay. You know, you get sediments, nutrients, metals, trash. If it's earlier in the spring with melt, you might have chlorides from salt use washing in, auto fluids. Maybe people are washing their vehicles with the soap running down, over fertilization, you know, pet and goose waste, etc. The list goes on and on for what is coming into these basins. And again, that increased water temperature, not only does water temperature increase with the more shallow water column, but in this event, you know, usually it's kind of hot before a thunderstorm happens. So these surfaces are, you know, the water's running over hot surfaces. It is already warm as it's coming into the basin. So that's just another pollutant, thermal pollutant, which can lead to, again, that stratification component. So you could end up, let this go maybe a little bit longer. That's a nice shot, all the grass clippings. So yeah, we'll stop that. So again, that stratification, this is just another clip from that earlier presentation, and I just wanted to share it. So this is, this top column is a temperature, this middle one is dissolved oxygen, and this lower one is conductivity. So we've got the times of the year, and these basins are only, 2 meters deep. These are pretty shallow. Shallow, it's a stormwater basin. So you can see February, you know, they're seeing stratification occurring as far as the dissolved oxygen going on in the early February, March zones. Wouldn't be a thermal stratification necessarily. So what's causing that? Well, they were finding very good correlations between conductivity and stratification from, you know, just that time of year where salts are being applied. So that water, that salt-laden water getting in seemed to be contributing to stratification. Obviously, you get your temperatures during the hot part of the year stratifying. So I would just say, again, just a point that stratification does occur in these shallow basins. And the concern with that, I believe the time frame that they gave in this presentation was that phosphorus that you might have stored in the sediments in these basins can actually start to export within 2 to 5 days of reaching zero dissolved oxygen. So that anaerobic condition, it can start happening that fast. And so we got to be really mindful of, you know, want these basins to capture and treat and hold on to pollutants and not become sources of them. So, and then another thing that they brought up that can affect that stratification is wind sheltering. And they were going to be doing a lot more diving into this in the future. But I just wanted to mention it as something to also keep in mind. The more protection, you know, the less wind action that a pond has, the less oxygen it's receiving. And so there is some correlation between stratification or lack of oxygen based on that. So just throw it out there as another thing to keep in mind. Another challenge, maintenance schedules and costs. So obviously, the when and how do you access? Do you know what needs to be looked for? And the cost is big, especially for older ponds where there's HOAs or they're not financially prepared for the maintenance that's needed. I always like to make a little plug in regards to chemical treatments. You can see this lovely aqua shaded pond, and we've got to be careful about using these in stormwater ponds.
Hey, you could also use one of those big rubber 2-inch plugs with the wing nut on it. Okay. Yeah.
I think I'm getting somebody's, hang on. Well, I heard somebody talking about wing nuts, but I don't think it was in regards to me. So this is true for all chemical treatments, you know, with these, especially with these types of ponds. Stormwater ponds are meant to discharge during rain events. So using these are usually listed for use in ponds that are not really going to be discharging frequently. They're kind of meant to stay in the pond for like a few months at a time, even to help limit algal growth or vegetation growth. So when you're using these, be very mindful that a discharge of this, while not necessarily hazardous to organisms, it can affect aquatic habitat. So by limiting, again, aquatic vegetation growth in the habitats that are downstream of these basins. And so this can be an illicit discharge based on, it's got color to it. So it's one of the items that shouldn't be discharging. So if you're going to be using chemicals, especially with the shade, we see it a lot. We always try to recommend that people try to find an alternative method. You really need to try to control your outlet structure. If you're going to be applying this, then you kind of want to modify your structure to not discharge as frequently or as much as possible. But with doing that, you might cause flooding issues or back up water into the system. You could cause other concerns with restricting flow through your outlet to hold these products. And so this is downstream. This is a great picture that my coworker John Bailey got at some point while he was doing illicit discharge work. And this is from a pond that had dye in it. And so when these get into the natural system, they can affect, the fish that are here, the organisms that are counting on the habitat down here to have certain kinds of aquatic vegetation in them. So it can affect them. So just be extra careful with that. Always follow the labels. Make sure people are qualified to be applying that material. Just be careful. Let's see here. Knowledge and expectations is another big challenge. Depending on who's doing the maintenance and what kind of property it is, it might be landowners that are coming together to coordinate it. It might be they've hired contractors to come in and do that for them. So that level of understanding or just what that client has asked to be done can vary quite a bit. And as long as it's important to just keep in mind that there's a lot of different ways to go about managing stormwater ponds, as long as you're first remembering that initial function. The primary function of the pond has to be maintained first. Now, I like this picture a lot. This is a nice little pond that I found. This is from 2016, Jefferson Township, and I was so happy to find it because it had so much great aquatic vegetation around it. I think there is maybe some aqua shade in it. And looking at this, and maybe they could have done a little more buffer mode around the edge, but overall, it was a really nice little basin. I was excited to find it. So I took some pictures of it, but then as you'll see here in a minute, we'll get into how this change in ownership or just change in management goals, it changes. So you might not always see from year to year, it changes. So, and again, the service providers that people might use or, just knowing some of the practices that they do, mowing practices, not mowing all the way down to the water's edge, or if they are mowing, making sure clipping or blowing back up away from the water, not using fertilizer, in zones, winter maintenance, what are they applying to the hard surfaces that make it into the ponds? What do those practices look like? There's a lot of need for knowledge and education and understanding those expectations as well. So this little basin, it's got a couple nice pictures of when I first found it. Has a lot of really nice water lily. There was rushes. There was nice, wildlife habitat going on. And then only a few months after I took that photo, I got a call about someone was dewatering, and I was like, oh, and they were doing maintenance. They wanted to deepen the pond. They were doing a good job of what they were doing, but it was kind of like, oh no. And so I tried talking with the contractor about trying to save some of these native, some of the vegetation, and it didn't really work too well. As they continued to dewater, they were trying to figure out why they were having trouble dewatering faster, and this basin has a sister basin that is connected, and so they were effectively dewatering both basins. So they weren't aware of that at the time. And this basin over here didn't look like the other one. It was kind of the exact opposite, just water up to the stone. And so you can this is a good picture to kind of show. It does have some very nice shelving and some good areas where some vegetation would be nice in that one. But so what we ended up with, this is during dewatering, see the soils. Again, really nice vegetation going on. And this is August 4th. By the 12th, 16th, within a couple weeks, this is what it ended up being. And I was out there last week just to kind of see if things were looking any different. And I had to report, for me at least, that it wasn't looking like it used to. I mean, the grass around here has come in better again, but the lovely stuff that made me stop to begin with is not there. So again, it's just that my expectation, wasn't reality. It changes. So just being mindful of that. We'd like to see you go the opposite direction, from that to, the nice vegetation. But so anyway, moving on from my letdown. So what do we hear mostly from residents, landowners? Well, it's no surprise. Algae is a big one. Erosion. And I love this picture. You can clearly see, I think the mower was really, I don't know what it was mowing, but geese. And again, geese love eating grass. So, and having access, mosquitoes and stagnant water. We still do get questions and concerns about that. And a lot of times it seems like more and more it's in regards to forebays. And I think that makes sense just given their function. But obviously, visually appealing, not appealing. And then who's responsible? Once we start talking with people, they want to know, well, who's responsible for the maintenance? And depending on when it was built, obviously, this can change. A lot of older basins, it ends up still falling to the property owner for that maintenance responsibility. More and more, I feel like we've gone back and forth a little bit with some communities starting to take on maintenance with systems after the fact, after it gets out of construction phase, in order to help foot the bill, for the maintenance needs. That isn't always the case, but we are seeing more of that, I think, especially with like residential subdivision systems. But for private systems, and in those old ones that are shared usually by HOAs, it can be hard to tell them that it is your responsibility. The other question, obviously, who can perform the work? Well, this can vary quite a bit. Obviously, some stuff can be done by the people that live around the pond. You might want to hire people out depending on what kind of work needs to be done. This inspection schedule is from the EPA Pond Management Guide some years ago. But again, depending on what the item is, the skill level needed, a lot of stuff can be done without a whole lot of, maybe a little bit of training, a little bit of education. A lot of that frequent inspection and maintenance can be handled without too much additional cost or effort. Now, financial part of it, that's, I know I always get asked if there's any assistance for people that have to, manage these systems, and we really don't have anything good to tell people in that regard. So it's always, letting them know to try to plan as much as they can for potential maintenance needs. So now that we know the challenges and concerns, how do we try to work towards addressing them and reducing impacts? Get rid of my screen. Education. I mean, that's where it all starts for us. We talk with a lot of people. We do site visits. We're in the process of putting together some video recordings, a little series, hopefully over this year, on ponds and other things as well, but trying to, get education out to people on what these systems are, how they function, maintenance needed, best uses, practices. So again, talking about what kind of uses are going on, and that regular inspection and maintenance, that is really needed, and it really does help with large maintenance needs. The regular inspection and maintenance is key, and we found the more we reach out to private owners of systems, the more pleasantly surprised I have been actually with people that have already been trying to do inspections and maintenance, and when they haven't really been doing them regularly. When we ask the question to them, it has prompted them to have someone come and check on a system, and they have maybe found some, clogs or things that need to be addressed, and it gets taken care of. So it is important not only for owners to be doing the annual, but that's part of the reason why the MS4 permit, is asking for regular follow-up from MS4s. That reminder to people on what's needed is very, does seem to have a great impact on that maintenance, on whether it's getting done. So vegetation, no-mow areas, chemical-free areas, we always try to get people to do that. This is a nice little picture of some really good vegetation along the water edge. Maybe a little bit more buffer up here would be nice, but this is great. And vegetation, there's a lot of benefit, but vegetation helps with bank erosion, helps deter geese, at least access walking from the slope to the water. They don't like to, they tall vegetation, that it could be predators hiding in there, so they're less likely to walk through this kind of vegetation other than grass that's right up to the water's edge. Trees, again, would be something to consider, especially along south and west exposures for shading for thermal temperatures, but also be mindful of that possible sheltering condition, if you get too much shelter with not enough wind action. Also, whatever kind of vegetation you want to plant or decide to, being mindful of structures. You don't want to put, you want to have good access to structures for maintenance and inspection. If you have berms or dams, you don't really want to plant woody trees and things on those. You want to, maintain the structural stability of those. So there are some areas you wouldn't want to, that wouldn't be the best use. Maybe some grasses would be better there. Again, other ways to reduce impacts to the pond, think about capturing this runoff before it gets to your pond. Encourage residents to install rain gardens. People love installing rain gardens. So, they're happy to do it. And they do help, capture that pollutant before. Now, you could do roadside ones as well to help capture, things before they get to the basin, to where you can clean it sooner rather than have to dredge a whole pond or, deal with that. Aeration is another one we always throw out there to folks. Again, you get this separation zone where you got your not as much oxygen for, so you've got aeration just helps keep the zone mixed so that you're not getting that thermal stratification going on and maybe possibly exporting nutrients, or just a good practice for most ponds in general. Obviously, we'd like to see it probably used more. I think more communities are installing them, but bottom bubblers is what we generally recommend to folks, and give you some more information on that if you want. Other things to consider, start, putting in, pet waste collection stations, or things that your residents, if they're going to be utilizing the area, help them understand like what's going to the pond and how their actions kind of change how that pond functions. Street sweeping. This is something that can easily maybe easily be done, especially you got to have curbed roadways. But I mean, if you came in and street swept, a couple times, during certain times of the year, or did leaf collections or things like that, just limiting the amount of material that's making it into the basin. It would be great to keep this stuff from getting in there. Or this picture isn't the greatest, I tried, but inlet filters. This is just one, you can use these during construction, obviously, but this was one that was actually left in place after construction. There's all kinds of different filters, but these are great for, capturing pollutants. You got to obviously be able to maintain these and get to them as you need to, but, and, more costly, but water quality units, so you're getting into more cost. But if you've got an option to maybe do some upstream work so that you're not, so that the pollutants aren't being as effective in the basin itself. So other considerations, resources. So you might not, those practices are good to help limit impacts. Maybe you're to the point where it isn't going to make a difference. You need to really think about something else. You need to go fuller scale, whether that is dredging, but consider, retrofit. If you're getting to that point, maybe this basin, depending on the residents that live around, again, that expectation, what do people want to see? Do they want to see open water? Are they okay with, maybe seeing more vegetation, or maybe transitioning a basin into a little bit more of a wetland, function, letting it kind of succeed how it would naturally. From the time a pond is built, it's always starting to fill. So over time, it will fill. Work with, what is the goal? What's the function that's needed for stormwater? But then how can you improve that to get more filter and capture? So this is just a little diagram from Crawford Farms. But something I will mention, I wasn't able to attend the stormwater conference last week, but I was able to start watching some of the presentations, and Bob Hawley, who has done a lot of work sustaining streams work. There is a basin retrofit tool that they talked about last week. And this is the link to you can watch, there's a YouTube channel where this presentation is, I think it's a 3-hour one on this one, this version of it. But and Dave might talk to this a little bit later as well, but I just wanted to throw this out there. This is a really nice, quick little decision tree about maybe finding basins that would be good fits for different types of retrofits, whether it's a very simple V-notch to a structure, existing structure. Maybe you add some restriction at the outlet with it, orifice plates or otherwise, or you have to go more of or maybe it's a better option for a more extensive retrofit and upgrades. And so this is a really neat this is a really great presentation and a really neat tool for the toolbox, to utilize moving forward. Also, we've talked about this a little bit in the past, so we have a pilot pond project kind of in the progress right now. We started out coordinating with Fairfield Stormwater to use their hydrone to do some mapping of current conditions. And the goal of this was to kind of really get an idea of what the current depths of these ponds were. So knowing like how much, get a good understanding of how much sediment has come into these basins and get that elevation detail. So we really are to a good point where we've been able to take the data that we got in the field, and this is just one quick shot of one of the ponds, kind of as an example of the kind of data we were able to get with the hydrone. This is the bottom of the pond, really great depth information. There's a nice little aerial of what it looks like, but they were able to see the average depth, about 3.8 foot, maximum depth was about 7. And what we need is, to really do great comparison of, we need the data at the end of construction. We need to know that as-built information, and that's really lacking in a lot of, we get some as-built information, but usually it's a structure and that's it. Like, we really need to know what this basin level, what the sediment level was before, so we can compare these, over time and see how much sediment, where it's accumulating. But this was a really great tool, really nice end result so far from what we're seeing, and really promising. Really love to use this a lot more, I think, going forward. But throw that out. And I think Josh is on the line. So if anyone's interested more in this information, Josh Garver in our office would be the point person for the most part. We can definitely get you in touch with him if you want to talk more. We want to talk more about this. Also, to go along with, thinking about retrofitting or just, gathering more information, think about the MS4 mapping components with the MS4, MCM5 mapping in the MS4 permit. There's a Tmdl performance standards in there. And so it specifically, especially if you're thinking of a retrofit, retrofitting is one of the options to meet the performance standards for the Tmdl performance standards if they apply to you. And so consider that. It might be a really great opportunity to do a retrofit and have it count towards this performance standard. And it's important to also know that these can be implemented outside of your jurisdictional boundary. They just need to be implemented within the identified Tmdl project watershed. So keep this in mind. I think retrofits is something we really do need to. It wouldn't have to necessarily be could be different scales of retrofit. So, but just reminder of that. Again, more data and elevate. We really need to start capture more information at the end of construction. Really get a better idea how much sediment loading has happened. Does it need to be cleaned out? Should it be cleaned out either way? What kind of impacts are in there before? And then during, I mean, afterwards, it'd be nice to know, continue collection and monitoring to kind of get an idea of what kind of things are going on with these ponds, whether it's just sediment loading in general or nutrients. So there's a need for continued and more robust programs there. Columbus Drainage Manual, if you are not, most of you should be already aware of this, but they made a lot of updates last year, and earlier this year they added an inspection and maintenance guidance manual. It's really robust, really good from what we've looked through, and we really like it. So it has some really great inspection schedules in there, some forms to follow for inspecting basins and other practices, but basins is one of the items in there. And to remind the county is currently in the process of doing a similar review and edit of their manual. So look for that information coming down the line. So kind of just some other items to, hopefully get you thinking about stormwater ponds, the needs, where we are with them, and some conversation as we move into these other presentations. So with that, I talked a while longer than I thought I would, but if there's questions now, I'll leave it up to Dave and what you've seen. If we want to field some questions, have any come in, does anybody have questions, or we want to just move on? Do we need a break?
Why don't we give Brock?
I do have questions.
Yeah. Go right ahead.
Go ahead.
Okay, I'm interested in the hydro mapping specifically. Is there a cost to that? And who do you get with to do that?
Dave, do you want to field that, or?
Yeah, I can try. So at least what we're doing is through the MS4 permitting side of things. Now, if you're a private owner or something like that, there's going to be a cost that I don't know what that would be and how that works. Like I say, we're working with Fairfield Soil and Water on that. I think Chad is actually on the line. Yeah, or Jonathan. Either one, we can certainly take a look at that. There are other ways of looking at the depth. We've also got quite a handy little sonar device on a fishing pole that we can throw out and take kind of spot depths or even a little bit of a profile to see what status your pond is at, basically. But the mapping aspect with the hydrone was very intensive, gives us great results on sonar, depth analysis and volumes. And it just kind of depends on what level of assurance you're looking for in your pond, I think.
Yeah, Chad or I guess Jonathan, do either of you have something you want to add about that? Have you guys rent your hydrone out to other private
so Jonathan,
owners?
I think Chad's in the middle of something up in Violet Township right now, but we're focused on local.
Right, but you're not talking
support.
about how much money this.
It's expensive. It was an investment that we made for the future of our conservancy districts, as well as our MS4. We have large dam systems in Fairfield County and two distinct watersheds. So all of our priority is put to those local efforts, opportunity to partner with neighboring counties to improve knowledge. We have another community that's made inquiry yesterday. Our goal at this point in time would be to work with soil and water conservation districts, but we're unable at this point to schedule things out. We got a lot of priorities that need our focus, but we have presented. We do have some PowerPoint slide presentations on what's there, but recognize that some of the equipment we bought was used, and it's an investment to move us forward. It is not cheap, and finding the equipment is sometimes difficult, but there are some other folks out there, I believe, that have the same capability. And maybe that's something that Franklin and Fairfield can collaborate to find the private contractors that are capable of doing that. Maybe we can share that in the future.
That's wonderful. Thanks, John.
Go ahead, Dan.
Where I'm at, all right, where I'm at is I'm a board president of a condo community in New Albany. And we have 4 sediment ponds. We're not sure how much sediment we have. And we don't know how to budget going forward of when we have to do sediment removal. So it's important to us to understand the time frame that we're heading for. We had one pond that's near the 161 pond that Columbus area came in, you know, the city, talking about ponds, and we were told that there's time to budget this. But at the same time, when we talked about how much this is going to cost eventually, $80,000 was it was thrown. And like I say, we have 4 ponds. So when we start thinking about from the HOA fees, and we talk about budgeting and things of that nature, it's critical that we do have a means to be able to, when this will all take place for us. It could be 10 years from now. But we need to be able to budget correctly for that. I think that using these tools we've got vitally from, but we need to have more information around the price of things and how we can interact with whoever has these tools and work that way. Now you're throwing out names and numbers and stuff. Where can I get these to where I know how I can?
Dan, let me suggest you contact us directly. We can certainly.
I don't even know who us is. Listen, I don't even know who us is. Who is us?
Franklin Soil and Water. We'll have our contact information at the end of the presentation here.
All right. Excellent.
But yeah, contact us. We can certainly kind of assess the situation a little bit better for you. It's certainly important to us from an MS4 standpoint, because the MS4s are tasked with that long-term operation and maintenance of these facilities. That's why we're doing a lot of this outreach now, just for that fact that we're going to have these situations where costly maintenance is going to come up with HOAs and private ponds like this that need to be addressed in some form or fashion.
Oh, here's another issue that I've run into. When our association was put together, when we, you know, the builder for this development, they had the sediment ponds built into their maps and everything, and it's correct in all the things that they did. What happened was, as the residents or the people those areas paid a premium to have ponds that have fountains. So from what I understand, we're wanting to make a healthy pond. We want to have the right type of vegetation. We want to have the right type of atmosphere for the pond. But that doesn't necessarily entail fountains. I can see aerators. I can see bubblers. I can see that helps the pond. Fountains to me don't. The residents that we have surrounding these ponds, those fountains are precious to them. And so as a board, we have a dilemma. Or do we start trying to go for the health of that pond to that?
Yeah. You're not
Yeah,
alone in that challenge.
I'm sure
Yeah, and you know, you're starting
not
where you
alone.
should, I think. You're trying to, gather the information first, again, knowing how those ponds are supposed to function first. Obviously getting an idea of what kind of condition they're in right now is another important step, but also that's where this, expectation from property owner to property owner can vary greatly on what they want to see, whether it's open water, whether they're, so it just is a lot more communication that needs to happen. We have talked with HOAs in the past. I've gone to meetings to present on some stuff. And so again, by contacting with us, Franklin Soil and Water, we can help. If that's something you're interested in, we could also look to schedule something like that if you find it would be helpful for your residents in another format, so that you're not having to try to dissolve everything and share that with them, or however it would work for you. But it really does start with a lot of conversation.
Well, I hear what you're saying. I found these ponds that have spent premium money for the aesthetics of the fountain to be willing to say, we don't need the fountain any longer. We want to just have a healthy pond. That's counterintuitive to what I think is going to take place. And when we think about the pond or the fountains, the Aqua Doc person that we had told me that we have 6 fountains in the 4 ponds. 2 of the ponds have 1 each, and then 2 of the others have 2 each. The amount of money it takes to power the fountains is about $600 a month, and that's excessive. That's a lot of money.
And Dan, I just think you're
they have their
dealing with
difficulties. So
you're dealing with the
we're going
various, it's kind of the competing aesthetics that we have to struggle with a lot on whether we're looking at, vegetated ponds or open water ponds, with that fountain. Especially in residential areas, that competing aesthetic, mowing down to the water's edge is common in a lot of these places. That's something that it just promotes geese habitat, which promotes nutrients, which promotes algae.
Let me go on. You're saying stuff that I already know. All right. But the issue is we have quite a bit of money that we're investing in for the utility costs. And
yeah. Dan, we need to move on a little bit. Let me suggest that you get back with us. Brooke's contact information is up there. And let's kind of move from this. We can talk about your specific situation, get a hold of us, and we'll take a look at what kind of questions you have about your specific area, and just get with us, and we can further look at your situation. Let's go ahead though and move on. We're running short on time, and we're going to be here for our 2 hours. The way things are going here now. So Brock, I don't know if you want to chime in on anything or have any comments. I wasn't sure if you had a presentation or not, if you want to share your screen or just participate in the conversation. Otherwise, we can move on to my kind of final comments and closing comments.
Yeah, I can just make this short. I know that, Stormwater, first I want to just thank you guys for having me, part of this roundtable. I think it's great. Just making people aware of stormwater ponds and how to properly maintain them is vital. You know, because water is, you know, it's an important thing that, you know, we need to take care of. And if we don't and neglect it, we're gonna have issues later on. You know, our grandchildren are gonna have issues, and you know, and so on. So having this discussion is great, and I thank you for having us. You know, having Aqua Doc be a part of this, because we are a firm where you guys can, you know, hire us out to perform some maintenance. And I can't remember which gentleman was just speaking, but I mean, we do offer services, you know, for doing, you know, depth surveys, you know, and sediment surveys. We do offer algae and weed control, you know, for that as well. But some of those, I just wanted to kind of touch on some of those biggest concerns that we have or that we see, you know, because we service a lot of water around Ohio. And so some of those, you know, issues that we see are cattails. Those are a huge concern. They are invasive and they can overtake a pond quickly. Yeah, from 1 year they could spread, you know, they could double or triple in size. So taking care of your cattail growth is important because it does impede water flow and allows these stormwater ponds not to function properly. They also collect a lot of trash and can, like I said, just kind of, you know, prevent water and prevent them from functioning the way they should. Other thing is erosion. And so a lot of new developments, you have a lot of erosion because grass seed isn't put down right away, which makes sense because they're still developing these. So erosion is a big key or a big factor, but big issue that we see, along with it does decrease water depth. So erosion is a big thing. And then algae and weeds. So a lot of these ponds are just shallow. And so they, you know, just harbor a lot of algae and weed growth. And that's where like our services are, where we come in and we could, you know, apply various products and chemistries to help, you know, combat that algae, you know, with that. So I would say the biggest issue, biggest question we also get is like common grass carp, you know, putting those in ponds, because I hear that all the time. Oh, they eat the algae or they eat the weeds. They do eat some weeds, but you're also introducing an invasive species into an ecosystem where they weren't, you know, before. So we are against introducing grass carp just because you are introducing an invasive species. Other people may have some other, you know, professional ideas about them, but we don't recommend them. But you can also, other ways, instead of grass carp, you can like mechanically remove algae and weeds along with your chemistries and products as well. So that's kind of our biggest issues, the biggest things that, you know, we run into. Last little like plug, you know, for Aqua Doc, kind of the thing, or any firm that, you know, does services. We do offer free consults, so where we can come out. We're not trying to sell you our service. We're trying to educate, you know, homeowners, HOAs about the ponds themselves. And so that way you can properly maintain these. Or like the gentleman was asking about, like, you know, budgeting. I mean, that's a huge issue that we run into is, you know, these projects cost a lot of money. And so I'm happy to answer questions. I'm sure you can contact Brooks. She can give you my information, and, you know, we can answer these questions, you know, with a phone call or via email, you know, just because of time. I don't know how much time we have that I can answer certain questions, but, you know, I'm happy to, you know, have a phone call or, you know, email back and forth, you know, to you guys and be a resource for Soil and Water District. And again, just appreciate you having me on and let me share what we do. So I don't know if anybody has any other questions or what Brooke has, or, you know, or that. So.
Yeah, thank you, Brock. But I hope you do get some questions here. I know pond management's a big deal. It really needs to happen. These are all, you know, these all should be managed systems. I think a lot of people think these things don't need anything once they're installed, but they do definitely. I'll go ahead and share my screen and start what I was going to do. Like I say, I've just got some kind of final thoughts. Brooke did a great job covering a lot of what I'm going to cover, so that'll make my job a little easier and go a little quicker here. And then we can have time for a little more conversation. So we're kind of in the midst of formalizing our ponds program internally. We've done ponds for a long time. You know, all the soil and water districts have done ag ponds for producers for a long, long time. We've used the NRCS spec for agricultural ponds. So, you know, most of us know how to take a look at that and do that. With the MS4 permits, locally we have residential ponds that we look at as a conditional use during zoning. So we'll review residential ponds at that stage if they're over 5,000 square feet. You know, there's been a lot of problems with individually installed ponds on private lands causing drainage problems, flooding issues and things of that nature. So we're tasked with reviewing those at that stage during zoning. And then with the MS4 permit, of course, we've gotten into the stormwater ponds. So that's really changed things on how, you know, on conditions that we're looking at. I think Brooke did a lot of, she touched on a lot of those differences in ponds and what we're looking at. So really, you know, when you think ponds, it's what's that? Is it natural, created? You know, and what is the purpose of it?
Hey, Dave, just real
Yeah.
quick, I'm seeing your presentation, but I'm seeing it from the
From
like
the
your next
view?
slide view. Yeah, from the presenter view, I guess.
Yeah, what do I have to do here?
Swap. Let's see.
Is that working for you now?
Oh.
Oh, I guess not, huh?
Try. There we go.
Is that better?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, now I can't see anything, so I'll just have to push forward here.
Okay.
Uh-oh. I got a white screen here. What's happening? There we go. So just in context of you know, what's a natural pond? You know, we're in the glacial till area of Ohio, so it's very flat, a lot of hydric soils, and a lot of wetlands that just respond to groundwater, basically. If you go out west of town here, you know, a lot of properties look like this, and this really is kind of the remnants of what was, you know, pre-settlement Ohio, except we've turned it into ag, but now we've got, we still got the water. We don't have the forest that used to be here. You know, these would have been vernal pools within wet forests with broad sheet flows across areas. You know, the problem gets when you start seeing it around people's houses, and we see a lot of this now, especially at the urban interface where things are starting to build out. Marginal lands are coming under review and sale, and we get situations where we have these drainage problems like this. Now, again, here's an open field. I don't know how many places we've reviewed properties like this for sale that look like this in the wintertime or late spring. You take a look in the summertime and looks like a fine piece of, you know, property to build on. This is really what it wants to be. And we get a lot of calls with people that have properties like this, and they say, hey, I want to build a pond to help with my drainage situation. And I'm always kind of telling them, you already have a pond. It's just below the soil, and it's at the surface during certain times of the year. So putting a pond in these situations really doesn't help your situation any. You have to take a look at those soil types, and these kind of situations, it just takes tile drainage and a proper outlet if you're really going to manage this kind of water. I've got these two species in here just to kind of illustrate. If you look at our natural history, these two species really emulate what was here before. You know, you've got salamanders and freshwater mussels. Both these species, a lot of these are endangered in Ohio. A lot of that is because of the loss of habitat, and they developed here because of those wet woods and that filtering of water and that slow discharge to the creeks and that great water quality that has been established here in Ohio for a long time, since the glaciation. So that's really, you know, indicative of what kind of water quality we've had in the past. You take a look at this table, you know, this kind of, you know, we're really talking about wetlands here and how they differ from conventional stormwater basins. You can see that it's really apples and oranges when we compare the two. The conventional stormwater is not providing, you know, climate regulation, groundwater recharge, water quality improvements. Compared to a wetland, there's just really no comparison. The only two you see that are similar are that erosion protection and flood protection, which is pretty much what we designed stormwater ponds for, is trying to protect that downstream channel for erosion and that flood protection. You know, only recently have we added that water quality improvement to our ponds. And the only reason we've got that is because we're controlling a certain volume and not really contributing to the water quality in that basin. So kind of the life of the pond. You know, when I talk ponds, I'm generally talking created stormwater ponds. We won't address residential too much or ag ponds at this point. The stormwater ponds, what we're focused on because of that MS4 requirement and that look at that long-term management of these ponds. So as you can see, very compacted soils, a lot of clay soils. It gets driven on and shaved down, and a lot of these are to bedrock in a lot of situations. So there's just not very much bottom health going on in the first place in these. Again, creation of these is usually a pretty muddy affair. You know, they get built to usually they're full out size. A lot of people don't want to implement a sediment pond and then have to come back in and excavate a larger stormwater pond. So a lot of these ponds are constructed to their final configuration with the hopes that, you know, they're contain enough of the sediment volume during construction and the water quality volume during that build out period. So we see a lot of these ponds built to the final specifications without really considering that sediment basin aspect of it during construction. As you can see, you know, you get a lot of bank erosion, you get pretty high turbidity. That's why there's skimmers in these ponds, you know, and that initial loss of that sediment storage capacity in that basin. So we really look at, you know, getting those banks stabilized. There's just a couple of quick examples of what, you know, some good stabilization practices getting in around the pond that really pays dividends down the road as construction builds out, especially when we're talking about, you know, subdivisions, phased projects. You know, the basin should really be going in first. You get those areas around them stabilized first. Then you don't have to worry so much about added erosion at the sediment basin causing your increased turbidity. The other side of that is, you know, you've got other controls in place on the site, and you get, you know, flooding where you don't want it because it's not getting to your pond properly. You know, that causes additional flooding and problems off-site in situations like that. So you want to be sure that you're looking at your construction phasing and making sure you're working basically downstream from the pond, upstream through your project, so you're getting that discharge to your pond. Flood flow pathways. You know, most of these, all of these should have a high flow event directionality given to them. A lot of people don't realize that roadways, you know, existing wetlands, things like that. There's flood flow pathways designed to pond between houses many times in subdivisions, and people are surprised when they have 6 inches of water between their houses running to the pond. And it's like, well, in the construction plans, there's generally a flood flow pathway designed that may go down your street, between your house, you know, somewhere other than what you thought. And blocking those can cause, you know, additional flooding and problems with neighbors. So considering those flood flow pathways, you know, it's something, these ponds are designed for specific rain events. Anything above that is likely to trigger these flood flow pathways. So being aware of that is something that many homeowners aren't. Designers need to consider this and where it goes. But these are just some of the issues that we've ran into responding to flooding calls. So what do we do about creating habitat and function in these ponds? You know, I can't say enough about vegetation. I think that's really what we're looking at when we talk about functionality in these ponds. Here's a quick table, something that affects ponds directly and kind of goes to that MS4 permit aspect. This is Tmdl summary for the Laurel and Tangy Watershed. And it lists in there the MS4 reductions that they're looking for. You know, so according to the models, we're looking at MS4s here reducing, you know, 9% of the total phosphorus load and 65% of the TSS load from MS4 sources. So how are you going to do that? You know, what's going to make that change to achieve that? And I think the way to look at that is really considering vegetation and retrofits on older ponds. You know, how do we retrofit? What do we retrofit? Making those changes in the existing ponds that we have. We have a lot of ponds that have been built since probably 89 is when it really started for flood control. Later in the 2000s, we started seeing more water quality, channel protection, and that kind of aspect. And really since about 2005, we've seen the full-on water quality aspect. So getting those in place is going to be something that will probably come up with more focus on the TMDLs around the state. This we've seen before. This is the Crawford Farms retrofit. This was basically a 100-year floodplain storage area that functioned very rarely. Now I think Brooke had the plans up there, but the outlets have been, the inputs and outlets have been reconfigured so that this has a 4-bay and micro pool, and water has to flow around and throughout this wet field now for water quality purposes. And City Columbus had been mowing this for years. You know, it was a lot of maintenance just to mow it. It really had very little function. We've heard nothing but good things from neighbors on the look of it. It's brought in wildlife. We were out there the other day, and boy, if you want some big bullfrogs, this micro pool is the place to be. There's a herd out there. Again, another little retrofit of a dry basin. This was at a school, became a learning lab, modified the outlet structure to hold water a little bit to the surface, and created this nice wetland learning lab for the students. Unfortunately, I went out there the other day and looked at the inlet there. The inlet has since failed. It's no longer holding water like it did in the past. So that needs to be maintained if that's what they want to continue to have at that wetland area. Another example of a stormwater pond that has been vegetated. This is Highlands Park in Westerville. If you haven't been up there, I recommend you go see it. It's really a pretty area for taking a look at what a stormwater pond can be like. the habitat that's involved there. They've got grown some great cypress trees there. I'm just surprised to see how large they've gotten and the value that those have for this overall community and this ecosystem here. Really a great project. Good way to treat stormwater. Here again, just the northern end of it. You can see that very little open water on this. A lot of emergent vegetation, a lot of aquatics. Really a nice aesthetic. And this is something that, again, previously with Dan, we struggle with is what that aesthetic is. For me as a conservationist, this is a nice aesthetic in my mind. Here's that decision tree. We are going to incorporate this into our ponds program as well, taking a look at what kind of options are there for retrofitting basins. Some of them are very simple. You see this catch basin here. It actually has a lower pipe orifice in it, but imagine that not there. And something that's easily done is putting a V-notch weir in that window. You drop the water level maybe by 2-6 inches, 3-4 inches, but that provides a lot of additional storage, pre-storm for your basin and for that discharge out to whatever receiving body it is. Easy way to retrofit, but that's basically how this decision tree works and takes you down through the basically cost, more expensive on the bottom, but it is a way to look at your watersheds, taking an inventory of what's in there in the watershed and being able to adapt to projects to affect change in the watershed directly. Recent basin done up in Dublin. The reason I like this one is, they have done some vegetated shelf along the banks on this one, but this one also incorporates a lot of upstream functionality as well. So you've got, the pavement disconnect in front with that gravel verge along the parking lot. If you look down in the picture there, there's actually pervious paver parking areas. This also has bioretention cells further upstream within the parking area. Here you can see the vegetated shelf along this pond in either direction. And guess what? There's no geese at all in this park. I've never seen geese lingering around this pond ever. Some of the other design considerations, a lot of these basins are coming under our petition drainage engineer with subdivisions in the townships. We've gone to a more maintainable forebay that's concrete. I think Brooke alluded to that depth of the forebay, and these aren't 3 feet deep. They're maybe a couple feet deep at most, but they're also concreted and very easy to maintain. One of the problems that we are noting, though, is that verge between the concrete and the discharge to the pond. I think in the upper left-hand corner, you can see how well that little bit of separation works as far as holding sediment. Down in that right-hand corner there, you can see where that verge is starting to erode there along the edge of that. And so we'll probably look at modifying that a little bit, or trying to create a vegetated shelf off there so you don't have such a direct discharge and maybe not as severe erosion in that situation. As-builts, that's an important consideration. The new Columbus manual has requirements for as-builts that we are going to likely adopt as well. What's included in those as-builts, making sure that the pond is ready to go at the time of turnover to that HOA or whoever that entity is. That's something that we really need to look at is how these ponds, we don't know what the impact is during construction on these. That's been the biggest problem. How much of the design life is gone at the very beginning of the project? So making sure that that happens. This one, it's got the old temporary riser on it. It's been strung up to kind of function, but I don't think that the final punch out list on this pond was never completed, and that final configuration for that outlet was never done. Again, ongoing maintenance, that will be a critical factor for maintaining water quality in all of these. It's a lot of times it's simple things. You can see this catch basin on the left covered with a bunch of mulch. Who's going to get out there, clean that off? Nobody had been out there and cleaned that off for quite a while, and they had staged up enough where the vegetation's died because it's been inundated. So nobody's responding to that to clean that catch basin off in a timely fashion. Old dandy bags. I don't know how many old dandy bags I've seen left on structures. That's a simple thing that at the end of construction that needs to be turned over to that entity in a working fashion. And the one on the right is kind of interesting. This was a pharmaceutical company that had put in an emergency shutoff valve in their catch basin in case they had a spill, and they could immediately address that. The property management there, took it upon themselves to just close it all the time. So this basin was always accessing the overflow, the emergency overflow in this pond. So it had been staged up since they closed that valve basically, and was providing basically no stormwater storage because it had already reached, was staged up to that overflow elevation. So quick talk with the property management, and have that opened, and things quickly go back to normal. But that's part of that ongoing check. That's part of that 5-year permit term of checking these basins in these facilities that is going to fall onto the MS4s to accomplish. Touched a little bit on algae problems. There's a lot of talk these days about algae, being kind of that sentinel as far as what exporting these ponds are doing. It's probably a good sign of when a pond is exporting nutrients. Once we start getting these things developed, there's certainly not what I would call a stable pond environment. Something has changed there to cause these changes like this. And let's not forget some other practices. They may not be ponds, but they certainly contribute. You've got pavement disconnects. That is immediate pre-treatment for any discharge, whether that goes to a pond or to a receiving stream. Pavement disconnect is a good way to go. Bioretention cells, great at that evapotranspiration and infiltration component. If you think about it, evapotranspiration and infiltration is part of the hydrologic cycle. That's 2/3 of our water cycle is taken up in that function alone in the natural hydrology. When we talk about stormwater, we've changed that completely, and that's really been a main cause of why we see channel erosion in municipalities. Rain gardens, another great aspect, especially for residential areas, small scale. And that's the thing with green infrastructure, is really that distributed practice aspect of it. We need to apply this broad scale, not just one regional facility that's going to take care of this. It has to be really a broad scale, broad brush approach to water quality. Don't forget underground detention. This is something that can be done on a lot of places, especially more and more in the urban interface where, that land use is just as critical as having, detention areas. So this I'm seeing more and more use of, just because of that dual aspect of being able to have your pond and play on it too. So, that's something that we'll certainly see a lot of. Long-term maintenance, we'll wait and see how this goes on these. It does take a bit more either camera, equipment, maintenance. Inspecting these is certainly going to be a more broader endeavor than what some people are used to. And just the other aspect, again, we get to that aesthetic part of these things is, how can we make these amenities? I think that's an important, we live around these, we think of these as water features and think of these as amenities. So what can you do to make them, accessible, make them amenities, really address that in what's appropriate for that context. Here's a very different situation. One man's amenity is another man's swamp. So that's really something that we have to struggle with. But looking at that context and what you're going to do with that pond is really an important aspect of that. You've got to have community buy-in on a lot of this to really support that use. Again, just another example, yes, it's cattails, I know, Brock, but, we've got that vegetated area. We don't have geese. And I know that pond actually supports a pretty healthy population of fish as well. Just more aesthetic views, corporate areas. The one on the middle there is one of the bioretention cells that leads to in the Dublin parking lot. This is part of their new smart lot program that they've adopted there. So all of this drainage is going into these bioretention cells first, then making its way to the vegetated ponds before it leaves the site. Again, just more corporate kind of setting, corporate parks, creating that aesthetic view. How does that fit into the context of the building? And frankly, I like the looks of them. It does create a water feature. The fountains create sound. It's a very kind of soothing use of that stormwater pond. The one on the right was actually a failed dry detention basin. It had gotten retrofitted with some replanting. And now, serves a probably just as good, if not better function than the dry detention basin was. And that's all I have. I think now we can just open it up. Was there any questions? Let's see, in the previous slide, does that rock incline deter geese? Yeah, I think I know which slide you're talking about. I noticed a lot of geese around that pond, a lot of goose droppings in that pond. So whether or not it deters them from getting into the pond, I'm not sure, but it doesn't deter them from the slopes. They're there in force all along that rock incline very heavily. And all of that runoff is going into that pond. So I'm fairly confident that they're helping with the nutrient load regardless in that pond.
That's also what we've noticed too around ponds is there rock inclines and rocks don't necessarily deter geese, like the cattails or like grasses do, because geese think like a predator is hiding in those grasses, and so that's what will kind of deter geese from edges of ponds is some vegetation and stuff like that. So.
And Brock, I would ask you, have you had to clean out rock inclines with cattails in it? And how does that process go? And once you start getting invasives in those rocks, what's the maintenance like?
Correct. It definitely is tough. We do clean out a lot of cattails that are in rock inclines. So we basically cut them, we'll spray them, and then in the summer and then in the fall, we'll remove those. So we basically come at that rock line, and then they kind of break down over time. So there's still gonna be some stubble within that rock line, you know, with that.
Yep.
But it is common. We do see that a lot.
Just looking at the questions, see what we have elsewhere. Yeah, so not as well as the no-mow, right? Feel free to unmute yourself if you have questions. I think how are we doing on time, Brooke? We're at 11:36. So we do have time for questions or not. We do appreciate and respect your time. I know we usually, lately it's been kind of the hour show. This one went a little long. I guess that's what you get when Brooke gets to take over and talk some more.
Yeah, I could have went longer probably. I was kind of trying to keep it under the hour mark. But yeah, if anyone wants to follow up on anything that like I said, I'll be sending out the recording presentation copies. Try to include as many links and resources in there as well. If there's anything that I didn't include or that you have more questions on, like I said, right now, even if there's something you want to go back and look at or discuss a little bit more,
Sure
feel
to put our
free.
contacts in there for Dan so he can get a hold of us
Yeah,
later. And
I thought I
take a
might
look at it.
also, yeah, I thought I might also just send Dan an email as well, since I do have his email, so we can follow up with him directly.
Well, I'm not seeing any more questions or interest in talking to us, so I think we're gonna wrap this up. Any final comments, Brooke?
I don't think so. Thanks so much, Dave and Brock, for joining in. And for all
Yeah,
of you
thank you,
for
Brock.
attending. Obviously, stormwater ponds is still going to be a continuing hot topic. So like I said, we'll keep it in the rotation for sure. And as we get more developed in our programs locally, feel free to share with us too what you're doing. I mean, Dave had some great pictures from around the area that I hadn't seen yet. So always looking
Yep.
for.
And we'll be sending out contact hours
Yes.
later, correct?
Yep, that is correct. So everyone, I've been kind of keeping track of everybody in the participant list. So again, if you don't see anything from me in about a week, and just reach out and I'll make sure to get you what you need.
All right.
Thanks,
Well,
everybody.
Thank you for your comments. Thank you for your participation. And with that, we'll say so long till next time.
Sounds great. Bye.